Your car makes a sound it's never made before, and 2 days later, the mechanic tells you it's the transmission. $600, minimum. And that's if nothing else turns up once they get it apart. You're standing in the shop, nodding like this is a normal amount of information to receive on a Tuesday. And internally, you're doing the math you always do in these moments. Rent is due in 9 days. Payday isn't for another 11. And your savings account, if you're honest with yourself, has about $40 in it. And half of that is basically a rounding error that's been sitting there so long you've forgotten what it's for. This is the moment most financial advice completely fails you, because most of it assumes you already have room. Save 3 to 6 months of expenses, they say, as if that's a sentence and not a punchline when you're staring at $40 and a $600 repair bill. So today we're doing something different. We're going to build a real emergency fund, starting from close to nothing, in 60 days, not someday, not eventually. 60 days, with a plan that actually works, even if your bank account currently looks like mine did at 23. Before we get into the content of this video, I want to note that all information in this video is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and should not be considered financial advice. Always consult with a qualified professional before making any decisions regarding your money. Now, let's get into the video. My name is Emma, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, financial psychology, and why women in particular get handed either oversimplified advice or advice that assumes they're already starting from 6 figures and a paid-off car. If you've ever closed a How to Save Money article because it clearly wasn't written for someone actually broke, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this one finally feels like it's talking to you instead of past you. Let's talk about the real number, the actual 60-day plan, and exactly what to do each week to get there. Here's the first thing almost nobody tells you. Your starter emergency fund is not 3 to 6 months of expenses. That number is real, and it's a good long-term goal, but it is not where you start. And treating it as the starting line is exactly why so many people never start at all. If your monthly expenses are around $3,000, 3 to 6 months means $9,000 to $18,000, which is such an enormous, distant number from zero that most people's brains just quietly file it under impossible and stop paying attention to the advice entirely. That's not a personal failing. That's a completely rational response to being handed a goal so far outside your current reality that it doesn't feel like a plan. It feels like a lecture. The real starter target, the one that actually changes your life in the next 2 months, is $1,000. That's it. $1,000 doesn't sound like financial freedom. It sounds almost small compared to the 6-month number everyone quotes. But $1,000 covers the overwhelming majority of the actual emergencies that derail people. A car repair, a missed shift because you got sick, a security deposit on a better apartment, a vet bill, a broken laptop if your income depends on it. It's not designed to protect you from every possible disaster. It's designed to protect you from the disasters that are actually going to happen, which are almost always smaller than people assume when they're picturing worst-case scenarios in the abstract at 2 in the morning. So, here's the plan. 60 days, $1,000, broken into 4 2-week sprints, because a giant abstract goal is paralyzing, and 4 smaller sprints are not. Each sprint has its own specific job. None of them require a raise, a new job, or a complete personality transplant. They just require 2 weeks of focused attention on one thing at a time. Sprint 1, days 1 through 14. This sprint is entirely about finding money that's already yours, money you're currently losing without noticing. Open your banking app right now, today, and look at every subscription you're paying for. Not the ones you remember, all of them. Scrolled through line by line. Most people find at least one subscription they forgot they had, sometimes 2 or 3. Sometimes a free trial that quietly converted to a paid plan 8 months ago and has been charging you ever since without a single notification you actually read. Cancel anything you haven't actively used in the last month. This alone often finds $20 to $50 a month that was just evaporating into nothing. Next, in the first few days of this sprint, Check if you have anything sitting around you could sell in the next week. Not a garage sale event, just one or two things. Clothes you don't wear, an old phone in a drawer, something you bought with good intentions and never used. List it somewhere simple. Price it to sell quickly rather than to maximize value, because speed matters more than getting top dollar right now. The goal for Sprint 1 isn't to be dramatic. It's to find $150 from money and stuff that already exists in your life. Money you were either wasting or letting sit unused, gathering dust instead of gathering interest. Put every dollar of it into a separate account the moment you find it, not your checking account. A separate savings account, ideally one that's slightly annoying to transfer out of, because friction is doing some of the discipline work for you, quietly, in the background, without requiring willpower every single day. Sprint 2. Days 15 through 28. Now we're looking at your actual spending, but not in the miserable, deprive yourself of everything way that makes people quit by day 19 and swear off budgeting forever. Pick your 3 highest discretionary spending categories from the last month, usually some combination of food delivery, takeout coffee, and impulse online purchases. You're not eliminating these. Full elimination is exactly the kind of plan that works beautifully for 4 days and then collapses entirely, because deprivation and motivation are not the same thing, and one tends to sabotage the other. Instead, you're cutting each one by roughly a third for 2 weeks. If you spend $60 a week on delivery, that's $20 back into savings, without the deprivation that makes people snap and abandon the whole plan out of sheer exhaustion. Let's meet Denise for a second. Denise is 31, works retail, and started this exact plan with $18 in checking and a credit card she was avoiding looking at because she already knew roughly what the balance said and didn't want it confirmed. In Sprint 2, she didn't cut anything dramatically. She just switched from delivery 3 times a week to delivery once and cooking the other times, and moved her daily coffee shop stop to every other day instead of eliminating it outright. That alone put $31 a week back into her account, which is roughly $62 for the sprint, without her feeling like she was white-knuckling her way through 2 weeks of misery just to prove a point to herself. By the end of Sprint 2, between the money you found in Sprint 1 and the trimmed spending in Sprint 2, you should be sitting somewhere around $300 to $400. You're not at $1,000 yet, and that's completely fine, because this is exactly where Sprint 3 earns its keep, and honestly, where the real momentum starts to build. Sprint 3, days 29 through 42. This sprint is about short-term cash flow, not long-term income changes. We're not talking about a new job or a side hustle empire or reinventing your entire career in 2 weeks. We're talking about anything that can put cash in your hand within this specific 2-week window. This looks different for everyone, and it should, because everyone's available time, skills, and circumstances are different. And pretending otherwise is how a lot of generic advice fails people immediately. It might be picking up 1 or 2 extra shifts if that's available to you. It might be a few hours of a skill you already have, tutoring, pet sitting, helping someone move, listed on a local app for a weekend. It might be finally selling the bigger items you've been meaning to get rid of instead of just the small stuff from Sprint 1, the things that require slightly more effort to list but are worth meaningfully more. The specific method matters less than the target. Aim for $200 to $300 in this sprint alone. Denise, in her version of Sprint 3, picked up 2 extra retail shifts and sold an old exercise bike she hadn't touched in over a year. The kind of item that had been quietly taking up space and guilt in equal measure. That put $240 into her account in this window, on top of what she already had. And she told me later that selling the bike felt almost like getting rid of a small monthly reminder of a goal she'd abandoned, which was its own kind of relief separate from the money itself. Sprint, 4 days 43 through 60. By now, most people are sitting somewhere between $600 and $800, and this final sprint is where you close the gap. Here's where it gets interesting, because Sprint 4 isn't about finding new tricks or inventing a 4th category of income out of nowhere. It's about repeating whatever combination of sprints 1, 2, and 3 worked best for you, because by this point, you actually have data on your own life instead of guessing at the start. If cutting delivery worked well, cut it a little further for these final 2 weeks. If selling items worked well, do one more sweep of things you don't need, because by sprint 4, most people are surprised how much they still find once they actually look properly. If the extra shifts felt sustainable rather than exhausting, pick up one more. This sprint typically closes the remaining $200 to $400, and by day 60, you're at $1,000, sitting in an account separate from your daily spending, existing purely as a buffer between you and the next surprise expense, rather than blending invisibly back into your regular balance, where it would quietly get spent without you consciously deciding to spend it. Now, let's talk about why this actually works psychologically. Because the 60-day structure isn't just a scheduling gimmick I picked because it sounded catchy. Behavioral research on goal setting has consistently found that people are far more likely to follow through on a plan broken into short, visible checkpoints than on one distant, abstract target. 3 to 6 months of expenses is abstract. It's a number so large relative to where most people start that the brain treats it as unreachable and quietly stops trying, the same way you might stop listening halfway through a lecture you've already decided doesn't apply to you. $1,000 in 60 days, broken into 4 2-week sprints, is small enough at each checkpoint to feel achievable, which means you actually keep going, instead of giving up around week 3 like most attempts at just save more tend to do, usually quietly, without even announcing to yourself that you've given up. There's also something happening beneath the dollar amount that matters just as much as the money itself. Each sprint you complete is proof, to yourself, that you can follow through on a financial plan. That evidence compounds in a way that has nothing to do with interest rates. The version of you finishing sprint 4 is not the same person who started sprint 1 feeling like this was probably impossible. Another thing on a long list of financial goals she'd tried and abandoned before. You've built a track record with yourself in 60 days, and that track record is what makes the next savings goal. Whether it's 3 months of expenses or a down payment or anything else, feel achievable instead of theoretical, because you now have direct, recent evidence that you are someone who finishes what she starts, at least when it comes to money. But here's where I need to be honest with you, because a lot of people get through sprint 2, hit a rough week, and use that one bad week as proof the whole plan doesn't work for them, when really it just proves that life happened, which it always does. Here's what actually happens in almost every version of this plan. Somewhere around day 20 to 25, something unplanned eats into your progress. A friend's birthday dinner you didn't budget for, a bill that was higher than expected, your kid's school asking for money for something you forgot about. This is not a sign the plan has failed. It's a completely normal part of any real 60-day stretch of an actual human life, which is messier than any spreadsheet ever accounts for. The plan only actually fails if a rough week convinces you to abandon the other 3 sprints entirely, instead of just absorbing the one bad week and continuing forward from wherever you actually are, rather than where you wish you were. Denise had a week in her sprint 3, where an unexpected copay ate into almost everything she'd saved that week. And for about a day, she told me she genuinely considered just stopping the whole thing and telling herself it wasn't realistic for someone in her situation. She didn't quit. She just extended sprint 3 by a few days internally and kept going, and still hit her $1,000 close to on schedule, maybe 4 or 5 days later than the strict 60-day mark, which, realistically, changed nothing about the outcome at all. There's one more trap I want to name directly, because it catches people right at the finish line, right when they're most vulnerable to undoing 2 months of work in a single afternoon. You hit $1,000, and it feels like an accomplishment, which it genuinely is. And then something comes up that isn't really an emergency, just something you want. And the temptation is to treat that $1,000 as a reward you've earned, instead of the foundation it actually is. I'm not saying you can never touch it. That's what it's there for. Genuine emergencies, the transmission, the copay, the thing that actually can't wait. But a new pair of shoes because you had a hard week is not what 60 days of sprints was building toward. And spending it that way quietly resets you back to the exact vulnerable position you spent 2 months escaping. Protect this number the same way you worked to build it, and only use it for what it was actually built for. Because the whole point was never the $1,000 sitting there looking impressive. The point was never having to do that frantic mental math again. Let's go back to that mechanic's shop for a second. The transmission, the $600, the mental math with rent due in 9 days. Picture that exact scenario, but with your 60-day plan already completed sitting behind you. The mechanic tells you $600. You don't do frantic math about which bill gets skipped this month, which subscription you'll have to explain canceling, which family member you might have to ask for help. You transfer the money, you get your car back, and the rest of your week continues completely normally, which sounds almost anticlimactic when you say it out loud, but that's exactly the point. That's the entire goal. Not luxury. Not a completely different life. Just the absence of that specific, familiar dread, replaced by something closer to mild annoyance, which is honestly the correct emotional response to a car repair. Not a full-blown financial crisis threatening to unravel your whole month. You don't need 6 figures to start this. You don't need a stable, high income, or a partner who handles the finances, or any of the assumptions baked into most saving advice that was clearly written by someone who forgot what being genuinely broke feels like. You need 60 days, 4 sprints, and a willingness to start with whatever you actually have right now, even if that's $40 sitting in an account you'd honestly forgotten about until this exact video made you go check. Start Sprint 1 today, not the number that feels impossible. The one that's actually achievable in the next 2 weeks. That's how this works. That's how it actually gets built. 1 2-week sprint at a time, by someone who's allowed to start exactly where she is instead of where she thinks she should already be.